I am a 36-year-old dad who spent 10 years married to a woman who never loved me so much as she loved the consistent deposit dates on my paychecks. Her name is Madison, 34, and when we met I was already settled into a solid career in information technology while she was still in her eternal phase of discovering passions that somehow always required my financial support. I kept believing she was overwhelmed or unlucky or under pressure, but the reality was embarrassingly clear: she was in love with the lifestyle I built and tolerated the man who funded it. We have one child together, my son Noah, who is 8 and the only reason I stayed as long as I did. I grew up without a father and promised myself I would never force my kid to go through that. But staying in a marriage where you feel like an underperforming intern being evaluated by a supervisor with a clipboard is not fatherhood, it is survival. And every year her family confirmed it. They treated me like the living, breathing wallet they politely tolerated at holidays. They adored Madison's older sister Chelsea, who is 38, and glorified her husband Trent because he once installed a garbage disposal without electrocuting himself. Meanwhile I was the soft one because I worked from home and spent my days typing on a computer instead of swinging a hammer. They said that to my face more than once. I swallowed all of it because Noah loved his cousins and I kept telling myself that stability matters more than pride. But this Thanksgiving was the kind of event that permanently rearranges the rest of your life. Madison insisted we go to her parents' house. Her family thinks they are the quintessential American sitcom clan, loud and dramatic with exaggerated traditions and an obsession with their generational recipes that are, ironically, mostly pre-made dishes from grocery store aisles. We arrived at 3 in the afternoon to the classic lukewarm welcome, the kind you give a coworker who moved away 3 years ago but still invites themselves to company parties. Chelsea and Trent were already there with their 3 children who are treated like the Holy Trinity simply because Chelsea delivered grandchildren first and never lets anyone forget it. Dinner was late because it always is. When the food finally came out and everyone stampeded to load their plates, I noticed the usual pattern. Trent piled a mountain of food like he was preparing for hibernation, Chelsea carefully curated her plate like she was photographing it for a cooking blog, and Madison pretended she had spent the entire week helping with preparations even though I knew she had slept until 11 that morning. When Noah and I moved to sit down, I noticed our plates already set at the table. Both were cold. Both were random scraps taken from the serving bowls. Not actual trash but leftover bits that were clearly not plated intentionally. Someone had scooped whatever remained after everyone else had feasted and slapped it onto our plates with the energy of a cafeteria worker at the end of a long shift. I asked if something happened or if those were meant for us, and Donna, my mother-in-law, waved her hand without making eye contact and said that the kids and adults were served first and we should be grateful that we were invited at all because it was Thanksgiving, not a restaurant. The entire family nodded like this explanation was perfectly logical. Nobody reacted to how insulting it was. My son stared at the cold food, then tugged my sleeve and whispered that he did not like it here and wanted to go home. I leaned down and whispered back that I promised no one would eat him. He giggled but I could see the embarrassment in his face and something inside me twisted. The worst part was Madison rolling her eyes and muttering that I was being dramatic as if defending our child was somehow an overreaction. I stood up, picked up both plates, and calmly tipped the food back into the serving bowls. I did not slam them or shout. I simply refused to accept being treated like the family's pet who gets scraps. Chelsea shot up from her chair like I had struck her and accused me of being insane and rude. Trent stepped behind her and puffed out his chest like he was posing for a beer commercial and told me to sit down because I was embarrassing myself. Jim, my father-in-law, immediately turned pale, his blood pressure reacting to even mild conflict. He demanded to know what my problem was, and I answered that my problem was the way they had served my kid leftover scraps after feeding everyone else like he was the family dog, and that we were leaving. Donna snapped that I was not walking out and ruining Thanksgiving. Trent chimed in that a real man would eat what he was given because his kids eat leftovers all the time. Noah whispered again that he wanted to go home, and that sealed everything for me. I picked him up, grabbed our coats, and headed for the door. That is when Susan, the aunt-in-law who always smells like menthol cream and judgment, pulled out her phone and loudly announced that if I took that child out of this house she would call the police and tell them I was drunk and endangering him. I had not had a single sip. Everyone froze. Even Madison looked stunned for a moment. I told Susan to call them, and she did. She actually dialed the police because a father wanted to take his own child home from a hostile environment. When the officers arrived 15 minutes later, the living room was a circus of accusations, dramatic gasps, and offended family pride. The officers asked for identification and details. I explained everything. They asked Noah privately if he felt safe with me, and he nodded and told them he wanted to go home with his dad. The officers returned my identification and told me I was free to go and wished me a good Thanksgiving. And then Jim, who had been pacing and ranting, grabbed his chest and collapsed onto the sofa. Chaos exploded. Chelsea screamed that this was my fault, Madison cried, Donna scrambled to call emergency services, and Trent hovered uselessly. One of the officers quietly told me that I should take my child and leave because the rest was not my problem. So I left. And for the first time in 10 years, I did not look back. Madison did not come home after the police left and Noah and I drove away. I put him to bed at my brother's house, and he fell asleep instantly from exhaustion, still wearing the little flannel shirt he had picked for Thanksgiving because he had been excited to show his cousins. I sat awake on the couch until almost dawn, replaying the entire night in my head. For 10 years I told myself that things would improve, that if I just stayed patient or quiet or agreeable long enough, her family would eventually see me as an actual member of their clan instead of a hired extra in the background. Instead, the moment I stood up for my son, they treated me like a criminal who needed to be restrained, reported, and corrected. The house felt peaceful compared to the chaos we had left behind, and the longer I sat in that silence, the more I wondered how I tolerated the noise for a decade. It was almost 2 in the morning when Madison finally arrived. She let herself into my brother's living room with the frantic energy of someone who had spent hours crying and wanted to be seen as the wounded party. She looked wrecked, mascara smeared, eyes swollen, and she dropped onto the armchair like she expected sympathy to rise from the cushions. She told me her father had been hospitalized for arrhythmia and that he survived, but everyone was shaken. Her voice cracked enough times that I could tell she had been repeating the story all night to different relatives, collecting pity like it was currency. But instead of acknowledging what had happened to Noah or the way her family treated us, she said that her whole family believed I had humiliated them and that I needed to apologize for the scene I caused. I actually laughed because I could not believe she was still orbiting around their ego after everything. That laugh hit her like a slap. She straightened and stared at me as if I had betrayed some unspoken rule of her universe, the rule that everything must revolve around her family's comfort. I told her I was done being treated like an outsider in my own marriage, done being the one expected to swallow disrespect because her relatives could not handle being confronted with their own behavior. She shot back that if I walked away then I should not bother coming back, and I said that I already packed my bags. I watched the color drain from her face as she realized this was not one of our usual arguments where she stormed off and returned hours later expecting things to resume unchanged. She looked at me like she did not recognize the person standing in front of her, the one who had finally reached the end of all the excuses and all the bending and all the quiet endurance. She asked where Noah was and I told her he was asleep and that he was staying with me for the night. She claimed I was being unreasonable, dramatic, selfish, disrespectful, and every other word she had used over the years when I refused to cater to her family's demands. But something in her tone shifted when she realized I was not engaging in the same loop as always. I was not defending myself. I was not trying to justify anything. I was simply done. It unsettled her in a way I could see in her posture, in the way she kept looking toward the hallway where Noah was sleeping as if she could will the situation back to what it used to be. Eventually she stood up, wiped her face, and walked out. She did not slam the door. She closed it quietly, almost carefully, the way someone does when they know the moment has finality and they do not want to acknowledge it out loud. I stayed awake until sunrise, watching the shadows shift across the living room, feeling more clarity in those hours than I had felt in years. When Noah came out rubbing his eyes and asking if it was morning, I made him breakfast in my brother's kitchen and told him we were going to have a calm day together. He nodded and ate in silence, occasionally glancing at me like he was checking to make sure I was really there and not about to disappear into another obligation. When my brother woke up, he walked into the kitchen, saw my face, and did not ask a single question. He just poured coffee, handed me a mug, and sat down across from me until I was ready to talk. I told him everything. Every detail. Every humiliation. Every moment I had swallowed to keep the peace. He listened without interrupting, without offering platitudes, without telling me to reconsider. When I finished, he simply said that I deserved better and that Noah deserved better than to grow up thinking disrespect was normal. I did not go home. I did not call Madison. I did not check on the aftermath of her family's chaos. I took a shower, put on clean clothes, helped Noah button his jacket, and drove straight to the courthouse. Filed for separation the next morning. The morning after I filed for separation felt strangely calm, like the moment after a storm when your ears are still ringing but the world has gone completely still. I thought the worst of the chaos was behind me. I thought the yelling and the accusations and the family theatrics had already peaked on Thanksgiving night. I had no idea that the real rut was deeper and much quieter, hidden under the surface where I had never looked because I trusted someone who counted on that trust to do whatever she wanted. While organizing documents for my lawyer, I logged into our joint account, fully expecting to see the usual pattern of bills, groceries, kid expenses, and the general financial noise of normal life. Instead I saw a trail of payments that made my stomach twist. Small at first, inconvenient but harmless-looking amounts, the kind of transfers you would scroll past without noticing. Then larger ones. Then consistent ones. Every few weeks. 7 months in a row. $12,000 in total. And all of it sent directly to Chelsea. Not for childcare. Not for emergencies. Not for anything related to our household or our son. Just labeled, family support, the kind of vague phrase people use when they know there is no legitimate explanation but they need one anyway. I sat there staring at the screen, thinking about every time Madison had told me we needed to tighten expenses, every time she said we could not afford something for Noah right now, every time she acted stressed about bills that I now realized she was artificially straining by draining our account to financially prop up her sister. I brought the records to my lawyer, and he scanned through the statements with the expression of someone who had seen every form of financial disaster a marriage could produce and instantly recognized the pattern. He leaned back and told me this was financial abuse and that I had a very strong case. Hearing that word, abuse, hit harder than I expected. It reframed years of tension, excuses, mood swings, and manipulated obligations into something structured, a system she had maintained while convincing me that I was the one overreacting whenever I asked why money seemed tighter than it should have been. Madison tried to defend it when she realized I had found the transfers. She insisted it was normal in her family culture, that they had always supported one another financially and that I should understand. She said it with the same confidence she always had when redefining reality to suit whatever narrative kept her family innocent. My lawyer shut that down immediately by telling her we were not dealing with her family culture, we were dealing with a court, and that courts do not look kindly on one spouse siphoning marital funds without the other's knowledge. That was the moment she realized this separation was not going to be some argument she could charm or guilt her way out of. This was going to be legal, documented, factual, and she could not spin it into a misunderstanding or place the blame on me the way she had been trained by her family to do since childhood. Her shock curdled into rage quickly. She started calling relatives, and within a day the entire family mobilized like I had declared war on their dynasty. They said I was overreacting. They said I was cruel. They said I was abandoning my responsibilities as a husband. They said I was attacking their family values. None of them mentioned the $12,000. None of them mentioned the police being called on me for taking my own child home. None of them mentioned the threats or the insults or the years of being treated like the designated outsider. They clung to the one detail that made them feel righteous. Donna left me a voicemail saying, "You're breaking our family apart over leftovers." 3 months of legal back and forth changes a person. It wears you down, stretches your patience, and forces you to confront every uncomfortable truth you had pushed aside for years. Mediation sessions, financial disclosures, meetings with attorneys, reports from child specialists, each one peeled another layer off the version of my life I had convinced myself was normal. Every time Madison tried to twist a narrative or reframe her choices as tradition, every time she lashed out or cried or accused me of betrayal, the mediator's expression barely budged, but her notes became thicker. By the end of the third session, the mediator stated in the understatement of the century that Madison displayed concerning emotional volatility, and the writing on the wall was suddenly carved deep enough for everyone to see. When the recommendation came back that I receive primary custody of Noah, it felt like someone had lifted a decade of tension off my chest. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just relief. Relief that my son would live somewhere stable, somewhere warm, somewhere where he would not be used as a pawn in whatever drama her family was staging that month. Madison was granted every other weekend visits. She tried to argue, tried to paint herself as the victim, tried to sway the room with exaggerated tears, but none of it worked anymore. Emotion without responsibility loses its power fast. Last week, we finalized the divorce. I signed my name. She signed hers. 10 years reduced to paper and ink. I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter than I have since my 20s, like someone had opened a window in a room I did not realize had gone stale. There was no shouting. No dramatic chase. No desperate apology. Just the quiet ending of something that had been dying for a long time. A few days later came the moment that tied everything together. For some reason her family decided to host Thanksgiving early this year. I found out because Noah overheard Chelsea on speakerphone inviting Madison. He was playing on the floor when he paused, listened, and then looked up at her with that expression kids get when they are remembering something that hurt more than they understood at the time. Madison asked if she could take him to the gathering, like nothing had happened, like last year's chaos had evaporated with the ink on the divorce decree. Noah told her calmly that he did not want to go to her family's house because they made him feel like garbage last year. She tried to guilt him with the familiar line that they loved him. My son, who used to shrink in those rooms and whisper fears into my sleeve, looked her in the eye and told her they loved Chelsea's kids, not him. The quiet hit the room harder than any argument ever could. She did not take him. She left with her keys in her hand and a stunned expression, like she had just realized that her family's behavior had consequences she could not explain away. So Noah and I went to my brother's house instead. The house was full of noise, the good kind, the kind that comes from cousins laughing, food cooking, people genuinely happy to see one another. The smell of warm turkey filled the kitchen. My nieces and nephews ran around the living room in a chaotic but joyful stampede. Noah slipped right into the rhythm of it like he belonged, because he did. We ate real food. Real turkey. Real sides. Nothing cold. Nothing scraped into a corner of a plate meant for the unwanted guests. Noah went back for seconds, smiling the entire time. He talked more at that dinner table than he had talked during entire holidays with Madison's family. Later, when everyone was settling in with dessert, he leaned his head against my arm and said that this felt like home. It was a simple sentence, but it cracked something open inside me. For the first time in my entire marriage, I agreed with my whole heart. Home was not the house I left or the family I tried to belong to for a decade. Home was laughter that did not come with a cost. Home was food served with love instead of hierarchy. Home was my son sitting beside me, safe, warm, and unafraid. And that is where this story ends. A year ago, I thought I was trapped forever. Today, I am building something new with Noah, something honest and peaceful and ours. If you followed this story from the beginning, thank you for watching the whole journey unfold.